Hello, welcome back to another episode of Faith, Purpose, and Leadership. And today's episode, number 15, we are talking about how the most flexible leader wins. Have you ever noticed that some people get frustrated by every little change? Maybe the meeting moves, plans shift, your budget changes, your people don't respond to you the way that you expected, and suddenly everything feels like it's falling apart. Then there are leaders who experience the exact same circumstances, but instead of asking, why won't things go according to plan and flip out, they ask, what's another way that we can accomplish our mission? There's the same obstacle, but a completely different response. Today, I want to introduce you to a fascinating principle that I came across called the Law of Requisite Variety. Now, that sounds complicated. Nobody talks like that. But here's the idea. The person with the greatest flexibility or adaptability usually has the greatest influence or the greatest amount of control over their desired outcomes. Let me explain what I mean. The law of requisite variety comes from a field called cybernetics. It's the study of how systems regulate themselves and remain stable in changing environments, in whenever there's disruption or outside variables. And one of the pioneers of cybernetics was a British psychiatrist named W. Ross Ashby. Now, Ashby essentially discovered that in order for a system to effectively regulate another system, it has to possess enough variety or variables or responses to deal with the variety that comes to it. So he kind of coined this phrase, only variety can absorb variety. Now, I realize that this sounds like something you'd hear in a graduate level engineering class. So I just want to make this very simple. Think about a light switch. A traditional light switch only has two options or two variables, on and off. That's it. It has a range of two variables. And that's perfectly fine as long as the problem you're trying to solve or the environment that you're trying to create only requires two options. But now, what if we replace that light switch with a dimmer switch and a dimmer bulb? Suddenly, you no longer only have on and off. You've got 10%, 25% brightness, 50%, 75, and 100%. You've expanded the range. And because you've expanded the range of variety, you can now respond to a wider variety of situations. You can have a bright light because you're trying to find a Lego that your kid left on the floor before it permanently embeds itself in your heel. Or you can dim the lights because you're having people over for dinner, and apparently eating spaghetti under fluorescent lighting feels too much like a hospital cafeteria. So you have the same light, the same room, but now you've got more options, more variables. That's the basic idea of the law of requisite variety. The more complex an environment becomes with disruption, with variables, with obstacles, the greater the range of responses you need in order to navigate it effectively. Another example of this is your GPS. You type in a destination, your GPS develops a route, you agree to it, start, you're going. But then there's an accident, recalculating, road construction, recalculating. You missed the exit because you were talking on your phone, recalculating. The GPS doesn't have an emotional breakdown and say, Garrett, come on, man, we had a plan. What are you doing? Get your head in the game. No, it recalculates because the destination didn't change. Only the route, the way that we're getting there is the only thing that changed. And that is where this really applies to leadership. Because some of you are trying to lead in incredibly complex situations with the behavioral equivalent of an on off switch. You only have one approach, one strategy, one leadership style, one definition of success, one way that you think the future is supposed to unfold. So then you get surprised whenever complexity overwhelms you, or when you don't feel like you're in control, or the goal, maybe the goal now isn't for you to become more controlling or more authoritative. Maybe the goal for you now is to grow your range of responses. Maybe the goal should be for you to strive to become a more adaptable leader. Because the wider your range of healthy approaches, the greater your ability is to navigate complexity without abandoning the destination or your mission, your goals. And I think that this changes the way we think about leadership and, of course, faith and purpose. And one of the principles that I think we should lean on here is that adaptability isn't changing things that matter, your mission, the goal. It's changing the things that don't really matter to protect what does. Let me say that again. Adaptability isn't changing the things that matter. It's changing what really doesn't matter in order to protect what does. Here's a leadership problem. We sometimes confuse rigidity and authority with strength. We admire the leader who says, here's the plan and we're going to stick to it. And that sounds really strong and macho, but what happens when reality changes? What happens when a monkey wrench gets thrown into your plan? The budget disappears, maybe an employee that you love quits, the strategy that you implemented is not working, technology changes, your customer changes, or your team isn't responding the way you thought. The rigid leader, the authoritative leader, sometimes only has one response: push harder. The adaptable leader is going to say, what else could work? And I believe that great leadership isn't just having one really strong response and one style of leadership. Great leadership is developing a wide range of approaches and responses and styles, and having the wisdom to know which one that the moment requires, which one the situation needs. So let me ask you this question. What happens to your range of responses, your style of leadership when you're under pressure? Because sometimes under stress, I tend to shrink my range. I tend to retreat or go back to a default setting that feels comfortable. So the controlling leader is going to try to control more. The avoidant leader is going to withdraw even more. The talker is going to talk more and they're not going to really say anything. The micromanager starts tightening their grip and paying attention to stupid details that don't matter. I'll say that one sign of leadership maturity is that pressure doesn't send you back to your default setting. You start growing in your leadership capacity as a leader to have multiple approaches and responses. So that begs the question, how do I grow my leadership? How do I grow my range of style or approach? Well, here's three tips. Three tips I'll share with you to grow your range of responses. Number one, in true Ted Lasso form here, stay curious. Be curious. Grow your curiosity. Curiosity is one of my core values. I strive to be a leader who asks questions, who tries to understand. So grow your curiosity. Before you say something like, that's not going to work, ask a question. What haven't we tried? Curiosity is one of the fastest ways to increase your, I guess we would say, requisite variety, your responses, because curiosity is going to generate options. The second tip I have for you today is to grow your toolbox. Maybe you've heard the phrase, if the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, then all your problems will look like nails. That relates so well to this law of requisite variety, because only using a hammer is not variety. It's one tool with one main function, which is driving nails and occasionally pulling them out. But what are some things that you can do to grow your toolbox? I have a little list for you that I made. Read. Number one, if you're a leader, you should be a reader. Read outside of your field. Learn from younger people. Learn from older people. Ask them questions. Travel. Travel is an education in and of itself. Find mentors who don't think like you. Study other industries. Try things that you're bad at. Every person you learn from potentially could give you another tool. And your goal isn't to become somebody else. It's for you to have more available responses when a situation demands it. Third thing I'll say, run experiments. Try something new. Don't be afraid to fail. Fail forward. This is important because adaptable leaders don't necessarily make enormous changes every week. They test things. What happens if we try this? Like, hey, let's run this for 30 days. And then you learn, you adjust, and then you try again. Rigid leaders will always defend their methods. Adaptable leaders question and test their methods. And if your methods are no longer getting results, then why would you want to use them, let alone defend them? All right, that was leadership. We're working our way backwards. This is faith, purpose, and leadership. We started with leadership. Now we're going to go to purpose. How does the law of requisite variety relate to purpose? I don't think we only become rigid about leadership. I think we become rigid about our lives and the path that we think we need to be on to become the person we want to be or to accomplish the goals that we believe we are called to. When you construct a picture of what your purpose is supposed to look like, do you say things like, I'll know I'll be successful when dot dot dot. I thought I'd be doing this by now. I thought God would fill in the blank. I thought I would have this opportunity. And without realizing it, you attach your purpose to a particular method of expressing your purpose or finding it, discovering it. That's where the GPS idea really should come in handy here. Maybe your destination hasn't changed. The type of person you want to become hasn't changed. The things you want to accomplish in this world haven't changed, but you're just being rerouted. Your job changes, relationships with friends or romantic partners change. The opportunity you thought you would get doesn't end up happening. Things you thought would succeed fail. And I've said things like, "Oh Lord, this is not what I thought my life was going to look like." And perhaps I've often confused the route with the destination, the path with the goal. Because getting to the goal, you don't need to just have one path, one route. Think about Joseph from the Old Testament. God gave Joseph a picture, a dream, a vision of influence, that he would be important, that he would have the sun and the moon and the stars and his family bowing down to him. Joseph probably didn't think about the path or the route that God chose to get him there. He had the dream, he had a vision, and then he's thrown into a pit. His brothers want to kill him. And then he's sold into slavery. And then he's sold into slavery again. And then he's working as a slave. And then he gets a false accusation thrown at him. And then he gets wrongfully put in prison. And then he gets forgotten about. Then he gets brought before Pharaoh. And then he's given a position of leadership. Imagine the GPS. Proceed to your destination. Your brothers throw you in a pit. Recalculating. Sold into slavery. Recalculating. Falsely accused. Recalculating. Thrown into prison. Recalculating. Yet the whole time Joseph's going through all this, the destination remained the same. So I would encourage you, hold tightly to your convictions, Hold tightly to your character, to your core values, to your God-given purpose, but then hold the pathway forward and the methods with open hands. And I would say now we're getting into faith, trusting God to make your plans happen and ultimately aligning your plans with his plans. And faith is not just trusting God enough to follow him when it involves your plans only. No, faith is trusting God to follow him when his plan for you looks nothing like yours. I'd like to challenge you to think about one area where you are constantly frustrated. Is it in your leadership? Is it in your career, ministry, your calling, a relationship that you're pursuing or a relationship that you're in, a project that you're working on? And I want you to ask this question, am I really stuck? Or have I simply decided that there's no way forward and I'm not trying anything new? That's the question. What if you gave yourself five options? What else could you possibly try? Is there a person not connected to this that you can just share what's going on and ask them questions? How could you be more curious? What assumptions of yours can you challenge? What method could you get rid of that's really not serving you or the mission? Know your destination, know your values, know your identity, who you are, get clear on God's calling for your next step, and then grow your range. Sometimes the strongest leader isn't necessarily the one who refuses to move. Sometimes the strongest leader is the one who's rooted deeply enough to bend, to be flexible, wise enough to adjust, humble enough to learn, and secure enough in your identity and belief and hope in the destination that you can take a different road. I'd like to close this episode just talking a little more about faith, because sometimes we have a rigid perspective and approach to what faithfulness looks like. We think things like, if God is good, then this should work out. If God is leading me, then this particular door should open. If I'm being obedient, then things should get easier. If I pray, then God should answer the way that I'm hoping. And without realizing it, you've created a faith that only works under a very narrow set of circumstances. My dad texted me earlier this week and said, I'm so glad you're an even if Christian. Let's apply that to here. God is good. That's who he is, even if this happens. God is faithful, even if the diagnosis doesn't change. God is leading me, even if I don't get the job that I want. God hears my prayers, even if the answer is no, or wait, or I've got something better for you. What happens to you when life does not cooperate with your expectations? What happens when that door doesn't open for you? What happens when your prayer isn't answered the way you wanted it? What happens when your plans fall apart? A faith with only one acceptable outcome becomes extremely fragile. And I think this is where the Apostle Paul, he gives us this incredible picture of I would say spiritual requisite variety. It's a really popular passage of scripture, Philippians 4. Paul's going to say, I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. And then Paul just starts describing his range. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've been well fed. I've been hungry. I've lived in abundance. I've lived in want. And then he says, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. That, my friend, is range. Paul's faith didn't require just one particular set of circumstances in order for him to thrive. Give Paul abundance, he'll follow Jesus there. Give Paul poverty, he can follow Jesus there too. Put him in somebody's home, he'll preach Jesus. Put him in prison, he'll preach Jesus there too. Give him an audience, he'll preach. Take away the audience, he'll write letters. Put him in a synagogue, he's going to reason with the Jews. Put him in Athens, and he'll speak to the philosophers and meet them on their level. Put him on a ship that gets destroyed in a storm. Apparently, he'll float ashore on a piece of the ship and just start another ministry. Paul had awesome range. And I think that's what spiritually mature faith looks like. It's not a faith that says, God, I'll trust you as long as you do this and that. It's a faith that says, God, whatever road you choose, I'm going to keep following you. There's a huge difference there. Because true faith isn't trusting God to make your plan happen. Faith is trusting God even if his plan looks nothing like yours. And then suddenly we get to the popular verse that we see on coffee mugs and in weight rooms, Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Like I said, we put that verse on coffee cups and in weight rooms, and a lot of athletes like that verse. And we quote it when we want to try to accomplish something enormous. But look at the context that Paul writes this. Paul is not saying, Jesus will help me accomplish anything I want. He's saying, because God strengthens me, my faith has range. I can have much, I can have little, I can be comfortable, I can suffer, I can succeed, I can struggle, I can experience abundance, I can live in scarcity. And none of those circumstances gets to determine whether or not he trusts God. He does. That is strong faith. And maybe you need to expand your spiritual range. Can you trust God when the answer is yes? Probably. Can you trust him when the answer is no? When the door opens, when the door closes? Can you still worship when you don't understand what he's doing? When you have no idea what he's up to? Can you remain generous with your resources when things are tight? Can you remain faithful when no one's watching? Could you remain obedient even when obedience is going to cost you something? That is spiritual range. Just thinking maybe spiritual maturity isn't creating a life where fewer things can go wrong. Maybe it's becoming the kind of person who can remain faithful to God through a wider and wider range of variety and responses, a range of things that could happen that we'd be okay with. God, your will be done. Paul learned that. Notice he says that. That's literally what he says. I have learned. He wasn't born with this kind of faith. It developed. He grew his faith through hunger, through being in abundance, through disappointment and shipwrecks and prison, through freedom, through answered prayers. Every season that Paul ministered in, he just kept expanding his range. And maybe that's one reason God doesn't remove every difficult circumstance from your He's trying to use circumstances to increase your capacity. He's teaching you to trust him, and he's teaching you to trust him with the unknown. And over a lifetime, I pray that your range expands in faith, in purpose, in your leadership, until eventually you can say, like Paul, Paul says, I've had a lot and I've had a little. I've seen doors open and watched the doors slam shut. I've celebrated that God answered the way that I wanted, and I've cried over the prayers that he didn't. And I've had seasons where God's direction seemed obvious, and I've had seasons where I couldn't even see 10 feet in front of me. And I've learned something. I've learned that God is faithful through all of them. And so don't build a faith that only works when your plans, when everything goes according to your plan. Grow your range. Be the leader in your home and your community, at work, who's flexible and open to different approaches and ways of doing things. You will be the most influential and powerful component in your environment. when it comes to a system, the component in the system that has the most variety, that has the most flexibility, the most adaptability, the component in a system that has the most variety and range of responses has the most control over the outcomes. Now, the same is true at work. The person on staff who's the most rigid, who everything has to be done this way, and we have to go this route to get there, that person is going to have the least amount of control over the results and desired outcomes of the mission, and possibly be one of the weakest components in the system, in the organization. But the person in the organization that can be the most flexible, adaptable, willing to try new things, to try new ways, that person will be one of the most powerful people on staff. And they will have more control over the desired outcomes of your goals and mission. I pray that this episode was encouraging you to grow your faith, purpose, and leadership.